They said she was barren like the dust plains that stretched beyond her family's worn-down homestead, a woman whose worth had dried up with the rain that never came, and so when her father sold her to a rancher in the far west, they called it mercy, a way to rid themselves of what they called a burden, and she called herself. Her name was Elara, and though her heart once dreamed of love and laughter and the scent of lilacs on spring mornings, all that remained were the hollow echoes of being unwanted. The wagon ride to her new life was silent except for the creak of wood and the cry of crows overhead, and she counted each mile as if it were the distance between the person she once was and the ghost she had become. The rancher who bought her wasn't what she expected. She imagined a cruel man, old and desperate, someone looking for labor or loneliness to fill a void. But when she arrived at the Stone River Ranch, the man waiting there was broad-shouldered, sun-worn, with eyes that held the kind of sadness that comes from losing more than you ever say out loud. His name was Silas Boone, and though his presence carried the weight of the West, his voice, when he spoke to her, was gentle, steady, like a quiet stream cutting through dry land. "You don't owe me anything," he told her the first night as he set a plate of stew in front of her. "You've been through enough deals in your life. Let this place be the one thing that isn't a trade." She didn't understand what he meant at first, not until the days began to bleed into each other, the long mornings with the sound of horses and wind, the afternoons spent mending fences or feeding chickens, and the evenings when Silas would play a battered harmonica by the porch, and she would sit nearby, sewing quietly, pretending not to listen. There was something healing about the way he never asked her for anything, how he never looked at her with pity or possession. Instead, he treated her like a person capable of rebuilding herself, like the cracked earth after a storm that still had the courage to bloom. She found herself smiling one day, truly smiling, for the first time in years when a foal took its first trembling steps beside its mother. Silas was there beside her, leaning on the fence, his hat tilted low. "Never gets old, does it?" he said. "Watching life begin again, even when you thought nothing could grow." And she looked at him then, realizing he wasn't just talking about the horse. He was talking about her. In those 3 days that followed, something inside her began to change, not in her body, but in her soul. Where her family saw emptiness, Silas saw potential. Where she carried shame, he saw strength. He taught her to ride, not because he wanted her to be useful, but because he wanted her to feel free. "You can't heal in a cage," he told her, handing her the reins of his old mare, Glory. "You've got to taste the wind again." And so she did. She rode until the horizon blurred, until her hair whipped wild behind her and her laughter echoed across the fields like a song too long forgotten. She began to see herself as more than what had been taken from her, as someone capable of giving life in ways that had nothing to do with bearing children. She nursed a wounded hawk back to health after finding it tangled in wire, and when it finally flew again, she cried as though watching her own spirit take wing. Silas watched her quietly that day, then simply said, "Looks like you were made to heal things, Elara. Maybe that's what they never understood about you." The ranch became their refuge, two broken souls who found in each other the strength to rebuild. He had lost his wife years before, a woman who had died giving birth to a stillborn child, and the grief had turned his heart to stone. But Elara's kindness, her quiet courage, cracked that stone open again. The light came back to his eyes. He began planting wildflowers along the edge of the corral, saying the land should have color again. And she began baking bread, singing softly as she kneaded the dough, the scent of hope filling the air. Then one evening, as the sun burned gold over the prairie, Silas found her sitting by the fence, holding a tiny sprout she'd found pushing up through the dry soil. "It's a miracle," she whispered. "Nothing's supposed to grow here." He knelt beside her, looking at the fragile green stem. Maybe the land just needed someone to believe in it again. She met his eyes and felt tears rise, not from sorrow, but from the realization that she wasn't barren at all, she was overflowing. Not with the life others expected her to give, but with love, resilience, and faith. She had thought herself infertile because she had been told she could not create life, but here she was, breathing it into everything she touched. The animals thrived under her care, the land began to soften, and even Silas's heart, once so guarded, began to open like the dawn. In just 3 days, the walls she had built around herself began to crumble, and something new, something alive, took root inside her. She wasn't pregnant with a child, she was pregnant with possibility. And Silas saw it. "They were wrong about you," he said softly one night as they watched the stars rise. "You weren't empty. You were waiting." His words broke her, then rebuilt her. She wept into his hands, and he held her not as a man claiming ownership, but as someone grateful to witness her rebirth. When the rains finally came weeks later, the ranch erupted in green, and the air filled with the scent of earth and forgiveness. The sprout she had found grew into a wildflower, the first of hundreds that would later bloom around Stone River. The neighbors began to whisper about how the barren land had turned fertile overnight, how the woman once sold as worthless had brought life wherever she walked. Some said it was luck, others called it God's mercy. But Alara knew it was love, pure and simple, the kind that doesn't demand or destroy, but nurtures. Silas and Alara never needed to speak vows, their bond was written in the land they healed together. Years later, travelers who passed by Stone River Ranch would tell of the couple who had turned desolation into paradise, and of the woman who had taught the earth itself how to forgive. And if they listened closely on quiet evenings, they swore they could hear the faint sound of a harmonica drifting on the wind, soft, steady, and full of life.